Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Maybe because she wasn't supposed to be there anymore. 3 years out of uniform, and Taylor Hendress had learned that silence made people underestimate her. It was easier that way, running her father's failing hardware store, fixing lawn mowers, selling bolts, pretending the smell of oil and lumber replaced the burn of gunpowder. Easier to forget that she'd once been the Army's most decorated marksmanship instructor, until life and loss made her walk away. That morning in Cedar Bluff began like any other. A cold October wind sweeping down from the mountains, the sky still half asleep. Taylor counted out bills for Harold Peterson, the old Navy vet who always complained about inflation. 247.18, she said. Highway robbery, he muttered, though his smirk softened it. Back in my day, we could buy a truckload for half that. Back in your day, she said, minimum wage was $1 an hour. He chuckled, the kind of laugh that only came from surviving too much. Your daddy doing any better? That question, that innocent question, always hit harder than people realized. Good days and bad, Taylor said. Today's a good one. Harold nodded, pushing his cap back. You tell him I'll bring by some of Martha's pot roast next week. Man needs feeding, not whatever you're probably burning in that kitchen. Taylor smiled, pretended the joke didn't sting, pretended that running her father's life now, medications, routines, reminders, didn't feel like caring for a man half there and half gone. Clarence Hendress, former Marine, former everything. The disease had taken his sharpness first, then his sense of time. Some days he thought her mother was still alive. Some days he didn't know who Taylor was at all. When Harold left, Taylor leaned against the counter, staring out at Main Street, that single stoplight town where everything was the same, every day, always. Gladys was cranking open her diner's yellow awning. Ernest Wallace limped across to his gas station, the same one he'd run since the Korean War. Cedar Bluff, Wyoming. Population 4,200. The kind of town that either trapped you or healed you, depending on what you were running from. She'd been one of the ones who ran. 18 years old, full of anger and ambition, she joined the Army the morning after graduation. Said she wanted to serve her country. Truth was, she wanted to prove something to this town, to her father, maybe to herself. That she could be more than a small-town girl behind a counter. And for a while she was. 12 years of service, training elite snipers and special operators, teaching soldiers how to hit what no one else could even see. Her name had been whispered at Fort Benning not out of fear, but out of awe. Hendress could shoot through the dark and make it look easy. Then her mother died, a heart attack, quick and merciless. Taylor came home for the funeral, stayed a few weeks. Then the diagnosis came, dementia, and the strongest man she'd ever known began fatting before her eyes. So she stayed, traded in the Barrett .50 caliber for a cash register, replaced the sound of gunfire with the hum of fluorescent lights. And every now and then, when the quiet got too loud, she'd wonder if she'd made the right choice. That question didn't have an answer, not yet. It was almost 10:30 when she heard the engines. Deep, synchronized, government-type engines, not the kind that belonged on Main Street. She stepped out onto the loading dock just as 3 black SUVs rolled past, tinted windows catching the sunlight. Tommy Warren, her 19-year-old helper, froze with a box of 20-gauge shells in his hands. Think those are feds? Maybe, Taylor said, but not DEA. How can you tell? She almost told him about the spacing between the vehicles, the antenna configurations, the way the drivers moved in sync, Delta Force spacing, special operations, but she caught herself just in time. Just a guess. The SUVs turned toward the edge of town, where Whispering Pines shooting range sat nestled between the hills. And something in her, the part that still thought like a soldier, sparked awake. Later that day, the gossip hit Gladys's diner before the lunch rush even started. You hear about those soldiers, Gladys said, sliding a chicken sandwich across the counter. Clifford says a whole Delta unit showed up at the range, running some kinda nighttime test nobody's allowed to watch. Taylor tried to sound casual. Delta Force in Wyoming, that's unusual. Apparently they're paying him triple, Gladys said, and it's all classified. Nighttime qualification, isolated terrain, October darkness. Taylor's mind was already assembling the puzzle pieces. She knew why they were here. Wyoming had something few other places did: absolute darkness. No cities for miles, no light pollution, just black sky and empty land. Still, something about it felt wrong. If Delta was failing something, that was bad news. They didn't fail much. That afternoon, Lieutenant Christine Powell walked into Hendris Hardware wearing jeans, a gray jacket, and unmistakable military posture. Shoulders square, awareness on every movement in the room. "Afternoon," Christine said. "I'm looking for .50 BMG rounds. Heard you're the one who stocks the good stuff." Taylor's pulse slowed. She knew where this was going. "How many?" she asked. 500 rounds to start. Mix of ball, tracer, match grade. "Training." Christine nodded. "Night qualifications." Taylor took her to the back, unlocking the cabinet that held the high-end ammunition. Christine watched her with the eyes of someone who'd seen too much: calm, precise, calculating. "You military?" she asked. "Was," Taylor said, avoiding the real answer. "Supply and logistics." Christine smiled faintly. "If you were supply, you had good connections. This is better ammo than we usually see out here." "Cedar Bluff might be small," Taylor replied, "but we take our shooting seriously." They both knew what wasn't being said. When Christine left, Taylor stood in the quiet store, staring at the boxes of empty shelves. The name Delta echoed in her head. A nighttime qualification, impossible standards, and .50 caliber rifles. She written the training manual for that test. Literally. Years ago, under classification high enough that most generals couldn't access it. She could almost feel the Barrett's weight again. The way the recoil pushed through your bones but left your mind sharper than ever. That night, as the wind swept across the Hendris Ranch, Taylor helped her father prepare dinner. Clarence was lucid tonight, one of his good days. "Heard Delta boys are in town," he said, chopping carrots with the same precision he'd once used to clean his rifle. "Word travels fast," she replied. "You ever train with Delta?" he asked. Taylor hesitated. She never told him much, not because she didn't want to, but because most of it was still classified. "Cross paths a few times," she said. "Good men," he nodded. "Best we've got, but I remember you giving some of them a run for their money down at Bennying." Taylor looked up sharply. "You remember that?" "Course I do," he said, smiling faintly. "Said you never tell your mother. Didn't want her to worry you were out shooting special forces." For a second he looked like himself again, proud, grounded, unbreakable. And then it was gone. His eyes clouded. He went back to chopping carrots like the conversation hadn't happened. Taylor swallowed hard. It was like watching him disappear in real time. Later, after she'd helped him take his medication and tucked him in, she stepped out onto the porch. The sky above Wyoming burned with stars, cold, infinite. Somewhere out there, 15 miles away, Delta Force was failing a test she could pass in her sleep. And she knew deep down it wasn't their fault. They were using the wrong method, relying on vision when vision was useless, trying to fight the dark instead of using it. She taught the alternative once: sound targeting, thermal mapping, proprioceptive alignment, training soldiers to shoot by feel, by instinct, by rhythm. It wasn't just skill. It was something spiritual. She closed her eyes. The wind carried faint sounds from the valley, the rustle of sage, a distant coyote's call. It was almost like the range again. Almost. Then the phone rang. Sheriff Walsh. "Morning, Tay," he said the next day. his voice carrying that casual weight of bad news disguised as a friendly visit. "Heard you sold ammo to some visitors." "Lieutenant Powell," she said, 50 cal rounds. "Yeah, federal liaison called me this morning. Wants locals to steer clear of the range. Apparently it's classified business." "What are they doing?" she asked. Walsh hesitated. "Unofficially, they're trying to prove something that can't be done. Pitch-black shooting test. 150 targets. Not a single operator's cleared it yet." Taylor's heart stopped for half a second. "How many tries?" 12, best hits 89. 89 out of 150. Delta's best. It wasn't impossible. It was just misunderstood. Walsh continued, "If they fail again, their funding's gone. Pentagon's watching. That commander's under fire." When he left, Taylor couldn't concentrate. Every instinct she'd buried started clawing its way back. She paced the empty store, replaying the mechanics of the test in her mind. Timing, illumination, field spread, cognitive delay. They were doing it wrong, all wrong. By Friday, she couldn't take it anymore. She loaded up her truck with paper targets, an excuse, and drove the 15 miles to Whispering Pines. Black SUVs guarded the entrance, security checkpoints, radio chatter, the kind of order only special operations could build overnight. A young soldier stopped her. "Restricted area, ma'am." "Delivery for Clifford Dean," she said. "Targets for the range." After a radio check, they waved her through. She parked near the office, unloading boxes while her eyes swept the field. Barrett rifles on benches, portable towers waiting for nightfall, men moving with silent precision, frustration in their shoulders. She could read it like a language. They'd been failing for days. Clifford came out looking worn. "Appreciate you bringing these, Tay, though I don't think anyone here cares about paper targets right now." "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough that the major's about to lose funding." He nodded toward the commander, Major Nash Coleman, posture stiff, jaw set like a man cornered by his own pride. Taylor followed his gaze. The soldiers looked drained. Their best shooter sat on a bench, head in his hands. She didn't need to hear the details. She could see them. They weren't broken, just blind in the wrong way. As she stood there, wind pushing across the range, she made herself a promise. If no one else could fix this, she would. But not yet, not until she was sure. Because stepping forward meant breaking silence. It meant revealing who she'd been and what she still was. And once she did that, there would be no going back. Not to Cedar Bluff, not to normal, not to pretending. Somewhere in the distance, thunder echoed, or maybe it was gunfire. Taylor Hendricks exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the range. Sometimes, the darkness doesn't need light to reveal the truth. It just needs someone brave enough to step into it. Why was she driving there again? Taylor kept asking herself that as the headlights cut through the Saturday dawn. Whispering Pines lay 15 miles east of Cedar Bluff, and she'd already told herself, twice, that she had no business going back. But the steering wheel had a will of its own. The closer she got, the louder that old part of her heart became, the one that used to wake before sunrise to teach soldiers how to do the impossible. The first checkpoint appeared at the bend. Same black SUVs, same hard faces behind mirrored glasses. The young specialist recognized her this time and just sighed before waving her through. "Paper targets again, ma'am." Among other things. He didn't ask what the other things were. The range looked different now. More wires, more tents, more tension. Portable towers rose like skeletons against the pale morning sky. The wind smelled of cordite and burnt metal, smells she hadn't let herself miss until this moment. Major Nash Coleman stood near a row of rifles, hands on his hips, jaw clenched tight enough to crack a molar. He looked like a man balancing the entire weight of the Pentagon on his spine. Behind him, 12 Delta operators cleaned weapons with silent fury. Nobody spoke. Failure didn't need commentary. Clifford Dean met her halfway down the gravel path, face drawn. "You really don't know how to stay away, do you?" "Guess not," she said. "They're shutting it down after tonight if nobody passes. Coleman's already on a secure line every hour begging for an extension. I don't think he'll get one." Taylor's eyes drifted toward the benches. Barrett M82s lined up like monuments. Massive, precise, unforgiving. The rifles themselves weren't the problem. The problem was the way the men behind them were trying to see in a place that demanded they feel. She took her time unloading the truck, letting her gaze sweep across the valley. Each operator moved with mechanical precision, checking scopes, cleaning bolts, rehearsing success they didn't believe in anymore. She knew that posture. She'd seen it right before soldiers broke. And that was when she saw him, the sergeant who'd scored 89. Scott Barnes, shoulders like carved stone, eyes red from sleepless nights. He was staring at the range as if trying to will the darkness into mercy. She almost turned around, almost drove back to her father's ranch, to safety, to smallness. But then she heard her mother's voice in her memory, "When you know you can help, you don't walk away." She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and started toward Major Coleman. He spotted her halfway. The look he gave would have frozen most civilians where they stood. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" "Maybe," Taylor said evenly, "or maybe I can help you." He blinked once. "Excuse me." "The qualification you're running, the nighttime engagement. I know why your team's failing it." Every nearby conversation stopped. The wind carried silence down the firing line like a wave. Coleman crossed his arms. "Do you?" "Yes," she let the quiet stretch, "because you're fighting the dark instead of listening to it." His jaw tightened. "This is a classified operation. You shouldn't even be on this property." "I delivered these," she said, nodding toward the boxes of targets. "So technically, I'm right where I'm supposed to be." "Technically," he repeated, voice colder now, "that doesn't give you clearance to critique my unit." Taylor stepped closer. Her tone didn't rise, but it carried weight. 12 men, 4 days, best score 89. You're using illumination-based acquisition, 2-second window, random sequencing across 500 yards. I know that drill because I helped design the prototype before it was classified. It isn't impossible. You're just teaching it wrong. Coleman's expression cracked, not disbelief exactly, more like recognition mixed with insult. "And who exactly are you, Miss Hendress?" "Former U.S. Army marksmanship instructor, Fort Benning, advanced sniper program." She paused. "You probably studied my work without knowing it." For the first time, one of the younger operators looked up from his bench. Barnes, his eyes narrowed. The Benning instructor, she was a woman. Taylor turned toward him. "You had trouble with proprioceptive alignment. We fixed it by shifting your balance 3 degrees left." He froze, the air thickened. "Only one person ever said that to me." "Then you remember me." Coleman's voice lowered. "If what you're saying is true, you held a clearance above mine." "I did." "And now you're asking what? To coach my unit?" "No," she let the pause hang, like the breath before a shot. "I'm asking to prove you're approaching it wrong." He frowned. "How?" "Let me shoot." Barnes' eyebrows rose. A few of the operators exchanged glances. Someone muttered under his breath, "She's kidding, right?" Taylor ignored it. 10 targets, complete darkness. Give me your Barrett." Coleman's gaze hardened, then slid toward the federal agent standing nearby, Barbara Fleming, clipboard tucked under one arm, authority practically radiating off her. "Absolutely not," Fleming said before Coleman could answer. "Civilians don't touch classified equipment." "She's not just any civilian," Lieutenant Powell interjected quietly. "If she's who she says she is, her clearance used to outrank ours." "Used to," Fleming shot back, past tense. Coleman's eyes never left Taylor's face. Years of command decisions flickered behind them, risk versus reward, regulation versus necessity. Finally, he said, 10 targets. Hit 8 or more, we talk. Miss 3, you leave and never come back. Deal. Barnes retrieved one of the Barretts and handed it over like a priest offering communion. The rifle was immaculate. She felt the weight settle against her shoulder, 30 pounds of steel and history. The range fell silent. Even the wind seemed to wait. Coleman's voice echoed. Range hot, 10 random targets, 2-second illumination each, begin on my command. Taylor lay prone behind the bench. Her breathing slowed. The noise of the world faded until there was only heartbeat, wind, distance. She hadn't touched one of these rifles in 3 years, but the muscle memory came back like it had been waiting for her all along. Acquire a line, breathe, break. Begin. The first target flared at 400 yards far left. Her finger moved almost before her brain registered it. The rifle thundered, recoil driving into her shoulder like a familiar handshake. Ping. 1. Second target, 280 right edge. Another clean shot. Ping. 2. By the 5th, she was inside that old quiet, the place snipers called the tunnel. Time slowed. The rifle wasn't a tool anymore. It was an extension of her heartbeat. 8, 9, 10. The final echo rolled across the hills, then silence. Barnes jogged downrange with a flashlight. When he came back, his voice was flat, almost reverent. 10 for 10, all center mass. No one spoke. Coleman's authority, Fleming's bureaucracy, the operator's skepticism, all of it dissolved into a single, collective disbelief. Taylor safed the Barrett and set it down gently. You're trying to see what the dark doesn't want to show you, she said quietly. Stop looking, start listening. Coleman folded his arms, but the edge in his voice was gone. Explain. The targets make sound before they light up, tiny servos, mechanical relays. You can hear direction about 200 milliseconds before visual confirmation. Your brain can localize that faster than it can focus your eyes. Use that sound, pair it with proprioceptive alignment, your body's natural sense of where the rifle's pointing. Vision is just one sensor. You have 6 others you've been ignoring. Barnes' eyes narrowed, so we shoot by feel. By trust, she corrected. Your body already knows the angle, the weight, the line. You just stopped believing it could. Fleming opened her mouth to object again, but another voice cut across the range. Let her continue. A tall figure in army dress uniform was approaching from the command tent, silver hair, calm authority. Colonel Frederick Stone. Taylor rose instinctively. Sir. Hello, Captain Hendress, he said, using her old rank. Didn't expect to find you hiding in a hardware store. Coleman blinked. Captain. Stone nodded. She built the original night engagement program you're trying to replicate. If she says you're doing it wrong, you probably are. For a moment, the Wyoming wind was the only sound. Coleman exhaled. Then what do you recommend, Captain? She glanced at the team, tired men who looked half defeated and half hopeful, and felt something shift in her chest. Let me train them, she said. 48 hours, 3 at a time. I can't promise perfection, but I can promise progress. Do it, Stone ordered simply. Fleming's pen clicked sharply against her clipboard. Colonel, this violates multiple. Agent, your objection is noted, Stone said, not even looking at her. And just like that, the decision was made. By sundown, Taylor was standing in total darkness with Sergeant Barnes, Corporal Bishop, and Staff Sergeant Palmer, 3 men trained to fight wars, yet suddenly unsure how to aim at nothing. No weapons yet, she said. First, you learn to hear. She moved around them in the black, footsteps barely scraping gravel. Sound reaches each ear at a different time. The difference is measured in microseconds, but your brain knows it. You just never let it. They turned instinctively toward her voice. Bishop too slow, Palmer too eager, Barnes steady as a compass. Again, she said, shifting positions. For an hour they did nothing but listen. Footsteps, breath, the click of a lighter, the faint metallic whisper of a bullet casing hitting dirt. Then came the next lesson, proprioception. Hold your rifles, eyes closed, she said. Find your stance without looking. Balance, weight forward, shoulders loose. They followed her voice, adjusted, failed, adjusted again. Your body knows this posture, she whispered. It's built into you. Stop asking your eyes for permission. Time vanished. Somewhere around midnight, Barnes finally got it. She heard it in his breath. I can feel it, he said quietly. It's there, I don't need to see. Taylor smiled in the dark. That's it, that's the point. Outside, the Wyoming night stretched infinite and silent, stars hidden behind cloud. In that emptiness, something long asleep inside her stirred awake. Not the soldier, not even the instructor, something deeper. The part of her that believed in people's hidden capacities the same way she'd once believed in her own. As the men repeated the drills, again and again, Taylor realized what scared her most wasn't failing to help them. It was how alive she felt doing it. Because she'd told herself that life was over, that she'd traded adrenaline for peace, rifles for receipts, missions for caretaking. But here she was, teaching impossible things again, her voice steady in the dark, her heart remembering the rhythm of command. Sometimes redemption doesn't announce itself. It just hands you back a rifle and asks if you still remember who you are. How do you teach men trained to conquer darkness to stop fearing it? That was the question echoing in Taylor's mind as dawn broke over whispering pines. She hadn't slept. Neither had the 3 Delta operators she'd worked with through the night. Barnes, Bishop, and Palmer were still wired from the training, eyes bloodshot, movements sharper than they'd been 24 hours earlier. The transformation had already begun. They started hesitant, rigid, trapped in their own habits. But by the 3rd hour, Taylor could hear it, the rhythm of men adjusting, sinking, trusting something deeper than sight. Barnes had found it first, his movements smooth, confident, almost meditative. Palmer followed, breathing steady. Even Bishop, the skeptic, had managed to lock in for a few rounds. Now, as the orange sunrise bled across the basin, Taylor stood with her arms crossed, watching them practice dry-fire repetitions in the half-light. Their silhouettes moved in unison, rifles raised, held, lowered not by command but by instinct. Major Coleman approached from behind, his boots crunching on the frost-hard dirt. They've been at it since 300, he said. You trying to kill them through repetition. Repetition doesn't kill, Taylor said. It rewires. Coleman studied her for a long moment. You really believe this works? I don't believe, she said quietly. I know. The major's eyes were tired but sharper than last night. I'll admit, Barnes looks better than I've ever seen him. Because he stopped thinking, she said simply. You can't see the dark, Major. You have to feel it move. He almost smiled at that almost. You sound like a monk, not a soldier. Maybe that's what a good sniper is, she replied. A monk who learned to breathe through chaos. He didn't argue. Instead, he turned toward the men on the line. We've got 24 hours before the brass expects final results. You think they can pass? Taylor's answer came without hesitation. If you let me finish training them, yes. Coleman nodded once. Then you've got the range until midnight. When he left, she caught herself watching him go, the way command weighed on his shoulders, how his authority seemed both armor and prison. She'd seen that kind of exhaustion before. It wasn't just the mission wearing him down. It was the fear of failing people who believed in him. By noon, the rest of the unit had rotated through the first drills. Some resisted, too proud, too skeptical. Others adapted fast, eager for anything that could save their team. Taylor divided them into trios, cycling between groups every 90 minutes. The sun climbed high, turning the basin into a dry oven of heat and silence. Close your eyes, she ordered, voice calm, steady. Hear the relay, feel your weapon, don't think, just respond. Bang, ping, bang, ping. The sound of progress. By mid-afternoon, something extraordinary was happening. The range, once filled with frustration, now thrummed with purpose. Operators called out corrections for each other, traded tips, even laughed between drills. The fear was leaving their bodies. Lieutenant Powell approached during a break, clipboard tucked under one arm, eyes glinting. "You realize they're quoting you now." "Quoting me?" Powell smirked. "Things like 'don't see the dark, feel it.' 'Trust your spine, not your scope.' You've become gospel out here." Taylor shook her head. "That's not the point. The method works because it isn't about me." "Maybe, but sometimes a voice matters more than a method," Powell said softly. And they needed one. Her tone carried something almost protective, admiration laced with warning. Powell had seen too many leaders burn out under the weight of other people's hope. They stood in silence for a moment, watching Barnes hit another perfect series. 10 shots, 10 pings, smooth as breath. "You know," Powell said, "I looked you up last night." Taylor glanced at her, and your file's still sealed under SAP protocols. Redacted everything except your commendations. I couldn't even find your photo." "Good," Taylor said. "That means it's still working." "You walked away at 32. Why?" Taylor hesitated, then exhaled. "Because my father forgot my name." Powell didn't speak. She didn't have to. "He's all I've got left," Taylor continued. "Dementia comes and goes like weather. Some days he's there, other days," she trailed off, staring at the mountains. "When my mother died, I promised I'd take care of him. The Army offered command track. I chose home." Powell's voice softened. "That must have been one hell of a decision." "Felt like the right one," Taylor said. "Still does, but sometimes doing the right thing feels a lot like losing." For a moment neither spoke. The Wyoming wind filled the silence, dry, honest, unjudging. As evening approached, Major Coleman gathered the team for a briefing near the command tent. Colonel Stone observed quietly from the background, arms folded, expression unreadable. Agent Fleming stood beside him, lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "We've got one shot at this," Coleman said, voice carrying across the range. "Pentagon oversight expects data by tomorrow night. We're going to run 2 trial qualifications before then, first at 2,000 hours, second at 400. If we're not hitting 150 by then, we're done." He turned to Taylor. "You'll supervise the training prep. My men take your lead until the test begins." Fleming's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Major, this is highly irregular. A civilian." "Who outranks half of DC in experience," Coleman interrupted. His patience was gone. "Unless you can teach us how to see in the dark, Agent, stay out of the way." Fleming's jaw clenched, but she said nothing more. Night fell fast over Cedar Bluff. The sky turned indigo, then black, until the range lights flicked off and the world became nothing but shadow and wind. Taylor stood with Barnes, Bishop, and Palmer on the firing line, their faces ghostlit by the faint red glow of instrument screens. "Remember," she said quietly, "don't look for the light, listen for it, trust what your body already knows." "Feels weird shooting blind," Bishop muttered. "You're not blind," Taylor said. "You're just seeing differently." The first relay sound clicked in the darkness, a metallic cough at 400 yards. Barnes rotated slightly, fired. Ping! A pause, another sound, another shot, another ping. 10 for 10. Palmer whistled under his breath. "He's locked in." "Not yet," Taylor murmured, "but close." They ran the sequence again. Barnes scored 94 out of 150. Bishop hit 87. Palmer 91. Numbers that would have been unthinkable 2 nights ago. The other operators watched in awe as the impossible began to look routine. Coleman's voice came over the radio. "Better, but not enough. Keep running it." Taylor turned to her trainees. "He's right. You're getting faster, but you're still chasing the light. You're reacting. You need to anticipate." "How do you anticipate what you can't see?" Palmer asked. You don't, she said. You feel when it's coming. There's rhythm in randomness if you listen long enough. The men exchanged uncertain looks, but they didn't question her. Not anymore. By 300, the exhaustion hit. Sweat, sand, and silence. Hands blistered, shoulders bruised, but no one wanted to stop. At 3:30, Barnes hit 138. Coleman lowered his binoculars. He's getting there. Taylor nodded, fighting the urge to smile. He's starting to hear the darkness. Barnes removed his ear protection, panting. It's strange, he said between breaths. After a while, you stop trying to find the target. You just know where it's going to be. That's proprioception, Taylor said softly. That's trust. Colonel Stone stepped forward, voice low. Impressive work, Captain. She turned toward him, still catching her breath. I didn't expect to see you still awake, sir. He smiled faintly. Sleep's overrated. Besides, watching this feels like witnessing doctrine change in real time. Taylor looked out at the operators reloading for another round. It's not doctrine, sir. It's instinct. The Army just forgot how to teach it. Stone studied her quietly. You ever think about coming back? She laughed softly, tired. To what? The bureaucracy, the politics, the endless redeployments. To purpose, he said simply. The word landed heavier than he intended. Purpose, she repeated. Yeah, I think about it. He nodded once, like that was answer enough. The next night would be their last chance. Final qualification, 150 targets, no second tries. After everyone turned in, Taylor lingered by the firing benches, watching the stars ripple across the cold Wyoming sky. The range was silent now, the kind of silence that made memory loud. She thought of her father, of the way he'd once stood behind her when she was a kid, teaching her how to breathe through the trigger pull. Steady, he'd said. The gun's not the weapon, you are. She built her whole career on that single sentence. And now, standing here, she realized the same was still true. The weapon wasn't the Barrett. It wasn't even her students. It was what they carried, that fragile, necessary belief that they could still become something greater. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket, a message from the nurse who checked on Clarence during the week. Rough day, some confusion. Don't worry, he's stable now. Taylor's throat tightened. She typed back a thank you, then slid the phone away. Duty had two faces, one in uniform, one at home. Both cost something. When she finally sat down on the bench, exhaustion hit like gravity. Her hands were shaking from fatigue, from adrenaline, from everything she'd tried to bury for 3 years. Hell of a sight, a voice said behind her. It was Major Coleman. He sat beside her, elbows on knees, looking out at the empty range. You changed them, he said quietly. Whatever happens tomorrow, that's something. She didn't answer. He glanced sideways at her. You could have let us fail, would have been easier. Maybe, she said, but I don't sleep well knowing I walked away from a problem I could solve. He nodded, understanding. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of coyotes in the distance. Neither spoke for a long time. When he finally stood, he said, Get some rest, Captain. Miss Hendress, she corrected automatically. Not tonight, he said and walked away. Taylor stared after him, the words sinking deeper than he probably intended. Not tonight. Because tonight, she wasn't the hardware store owner. She wasn't the daughter of a fatting Marine. She was the soldier who'd written the rules no one else could follow, and who just remembered why she wrote them. The clock was ticking. The team had 1 night left. Failure would mean the end of their unit, the loss of funding, the closure of a chapter in military capability she'd helped build. Success could change everything, for them, for her, maybe even for the Army that had forgotten what darkness could teach. As the first trace of dawn bled across the horizon, Taylor whispered to herself, a mantra she used to give her students before every impossible test. Don't fear the dark, become it. And somewhere behind her, in the tents, A dozen soldiers slept under that same dark sky, their dreams filled with the sound of distant targets waiting to be hit. Why did the quiet feel louder before success? The night before the final qualification, Whispering Pines was too still, no wind, no distant coyotes, no chatter among the men. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes you hear everything you're trying not to feel. Taylor walked the perimeter alone, boots crunching frost, breath fogging under the cold Wyoming stars. She wasn't checking equipment. She was checking herself. 3 nights. That's all it had taken to change everything. 3 nights since she'd shown up as a stranger with boxes of targets. 3 nights since Delta's best shooters had looked at her like a myth. 3 nights since she'd picked up a Barrett again and remembered what it felt like to belong somewhere. And now, all of it came down to tonight. Barnes and his men were ready, or as ready as anyone could be for the impossible. Their last trial had hit 143 out of 150, so close it hurt. But close didn't save careers. Close didn't save programs. Major Coleman had spent the day packing like a man caught between faith and protocol. Colonel Stone kept quiet, letting results speak. Even Agent Fleming had stopped arguing. Nobody could deny what Taylor had done, not anymore. Still, Taylor couldn't shake the weight in her chest. Not pride, not fear, something deeper, something personal. At 17:30, her phone vibrated, Nurse Lillian from Cedar Bluff. "Taylor, I'm so sorry to bother you, but your father, he had an episode this afternoon. Tried to walk to the old Marine Center, said he needed to report for duty. We found him near the highway, disoriented. He's stable now, resting." Taylor's knees went weak. Was he hurt? "No, just shaken, but he kept asking for you." Her throat tightened. "I can't leave tonight, not yet. I'll be there first thing in the morning." "I understand," Lillian said softly. He misses you." The call ended, but the guilt stayed heavy and cold. She stood there for a long time, staring into the dark until her reflection blurred in the truck window. Report for duty. Even when his mind slipped away, he still believed in showing up. Maybe that was what she was doing too. At 1900, the team assembled for the briefing. Coleman stood before them, posture sharp, voice calm, eyes shadowed. "This is it, gentlemen. 1 test, 1 pass, 150 targets. We've got clear skis, minimal wind, everything set. You all know what this means." He looked at Taylor, then back at his men. "You've worked harder in 72 hours than most do in 7 weeks. You've earned the right to prove this can be done. Let's make it count." Barnes raised a hand. "Permission to speak freely, sir." "Go ahead." Barnes turned toward Taylor. "Ma'am, no matter how this goes, we wouldn't have gotten this far without you. You gave us back something we didn't know we'd lost." Taylor felt her throat tighten, but she held his gaze. "You earned it yourselves. I just reminded you where to look." Coleman nodded once. "Mount up." The night was perfect, moonless, pitch black, the kind of dark that felt alive. Taylor moved between the firing benches, checking stances, adjusting shoulders, whispering reminders. "Breathe slow. Listen first. Don't chase it." Barnes was team lead. Beside him, Palmer and Bishop, steady, focused, transformed. At 2,000 hours, the range lights went out. A voice crackled over comms, the test controller from command tent. "Range hot. Phase 1 initiated. Randomized sequencing. Stand by for target illumination." Then silence. Taylor crouched behind Barnes, barely breathing. The first metallic relay clicked at 400 yards. Barnes turned slightly, finger resting gentle on the trigger. Bang ping. Second sound, 300 right. Bang ping. The pattern flowed like music, an invisible rhythm only they could hear. Across the benches, the others fired almost in sync. The echoes rolled across the valley like thunder stitched with precision. Inside the control tent, monitors flashed with hit confirmations. 20, 40, 60, 90. Coleman's hands gripped the table. "Keep going," he whispered. Fleming stood in the corner, speechless. Even she couldn't deny what was happening. Outside, Taylor moved between shooters, murmuring corrections, posture, tempo, trust. Her voice stayed calm even as her pulse raced. 110, 125. Barnes exhaled between shots. "I can feel the next one coming before I hear it." "Then don't fight it," Taylor said. "Let it happen." 138, 143. The last few targets came slower, staggered, deliberate, cruel. The kind of test that broke focus through anticipation alone. Taylor knelt beside the final shooter. "Forget the number, just breathe." Click, bang, ping. 146. Click, bang, ping. 148. Click, bang. A miss, no ping. The sound hit her like a physical blow. "Reset," she said sharply. "Find your rhythm again." He nodded, swallowed hard. Click, bang, ping. 149. The last relay fired. Silence. A long pause, then faint, distant. Ping. Taylor closed her eyes. Relief washed through her like rain after drought. Coleman's voice came over comms, low but steady. 150 confirmed. Then everything broke loose. Cheers, laughter, shouts echoing across the night. Soldiers who'd spent days failing the impossible now stood on the other side of it, victorious, disbelieving, alive. Barnes dropped to his knees, head tilted back toward the stars. "We did it," he whispered. Taylor stood there, smiling, too tired to move. Colonel Stone's voice came through the headset. "Outstanding work, team. Major, you've just made history. Captain Hendress, your methods officially reinstated under active doctrine. Congratulations." She stared into the dark. "It was never about the method, sir." "I know," he said quietly, "but it'll save lives." When the floodlights came on, the valley looked almost peaceful again, as if the night itself had been holding its breath. Coleman walked toward her through the chaos, men hugging, slapping backs, shouting victory. He stopped in front of her, expression unreadable. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it," she corrected. He extended his hand. She shook it, firm, steady. For a moment there was something unspoken between them. Respect, gratitude, something close to kinship. Then her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, the nurse. Her pulse spiked. She stepped away, answering in a whisper, "Lillian." "I'm so sorry," the voice trembled on the other end. "Taylor, your father's taken a turn. His vitals dropped about an hour ago. The paramedics are here now. You need to come." Taylor froze. The range noise blurred. The world narrowed to the sound of her heartbeat. "Is he?" "They're still working on him. Please hurry." The words shattered. Whatever victory had filled her seconds before. She didn't remember running to the truck. She barely remembered what she said to Coleman, something about an emergency, about her father. 15 miles to Cedar Bluff. Her headlights tore through the blackness as she drove faster than she ever had. The same road she'd taken to the range now became a tunnel of fear. Memories hit her like flashbacks. Her father teaching her to shoot. Her mother's laughter in the kitchen. The day she enlisted. The day she came home to care for him. Every sacrifice, every silence, every goodbye. By the time she reached the house, the ambulance lights painted the yard in red and blue. Lillian met her at the door, eyes wet. "They did everything they could," she whispered. Taylor's breath caught. The words didn't register at first, they just hung there, unreal, weightless. Then they landed. She stepped inside. The living room smelled like coffee and antiseptic. Her father lay still under a white sheet, his dog tags resting on his chest. She knelt beside him, touching his hand, cold, rough, familiar. For the first time in years, her voice broke. "You did report for duty, didn't you, old man?" Lillian turned away quietly, giving her the room. Taylor sat there for a long time, the world muted around her. Outside, dawn began to rise over Cedar Bluff, pink and fragile, like it didn't know how to touch grief. When the medics finally left, she walked to the porch. The Barrett case was still in her truck, unopened since the test. She sat on the steps, staring at it. Her father had always believed that purpose didn't end when the mission did. You keep showing up, he'd say, even when no one asks you to. Now she understood what he meant. At 800, a convoy rolled into town, Coleman, Barnes, Powell, even Colonel Stone. They stood quietly at the gate, hats in hand. No speeches, no condolences rehearsed, just presence. Coleman stepped forward. "We heard," he said softly. "I'm sorry." Taylor nodded, eyes red. "He'd have told you to stand up straight and stop apologizing." Barnes gave a faint smile. "Then we'll honor him the way he'd want, by carrying what he taught you." Taylor looked at them. This team of soldiers who'd come as strangers and left as something closer to family. In that moment, she realized something profound. She hadn't just trained them to shoot in the dark. She taught them to find light without needing it. And maybe that was what her father had done for her, all along. She rose, wiped her face, and looked toward the hills. "He'd have liked you all," she said, "even if he'd never admit it." Coleman placed a folded flag in her hands. "From all of us." She held it close, nodded once and whispered, "Thank you." For a moment nobody spoke. The wind carried only the sound of morning birds, tentative and raw. Then Taylor said quietly, "You have a team to lead, Major. Don't waste what we built." He looked at her, understanding exactly what she meant. "We won't." When they drove off, Taylor stood alone on the porch, clutching the folded flag. The sunlight caught the edge of the Barrett case, glinting off the metal latch. She didn't open it, not yet. Because some missions didn't end with victory or loss. They ended with understanding. And for the first time since she'd left the army, she understood what her father had always tried to teach her. You don't serve because it's easy. You serve because it matters. The dark wasn't something to conquer. It was something to walk through with dignity, with courage, with purpose. And sometimes purpose doesn't roar, it whispers. What do you do after the war inside you finally goes quiet? For the first time in years, Taylor didn't wake to alarms, training schedules, or rifle fire. She woke to silence. Not the cold, endless kind that haunted soldiers after battle, but the softer kind that follows acceptance. 3 days had passed since her father's funeral. Cedar Bluff had turned out in full, uniforms old and new, polished boots, medals glinting under the Wyoming sun. Sheriff Walsh read the eulogy. Harold Peterson played taps on a trumpet so worn it barely held tune. Taylor stood beside the flag-draped casket, eyes dry. She cried all she could the first night. After that, the tears turned inward. Her father was buried next to her mother, under a lone oak tree near the river. The stone read simply, "Clarence J. Hendris, Marine Father Teacher, Semper Fidelis." Faithful always. She stayed long after everyone left. The last to go, as always. When she finally turned toward home, the wind whispered through the grass, the same sound her father used to call the voice of the ones we served with. Now the house felt too quiet. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folded flag on the counter. Next to it lay a manila envelope stamped with a Department of Defense seal. Colonel Stone had given it to her at the burial. Not for today, he'd said, but soon. She'd waited 3 days before opening it. Inside was a letter, formal, typed, signed in black ink. Subject: Request for Active Duty Advisory Assignment, Delta Special Projects Command. They wanted her back. She read it twice. The offer was short-term, classified training contract, stateside only. No deployments, no combat. She could even stay near Cedar Bluff. But she knew better than to believe temporary. The Army never asked unless they needed. And if they needed her, it meant something bigger was brewing. That night she couldn't sleep. The moon hung pale above the hills, and the house creaked like it was remembering too. She made coffee she didn't need, stood at the window, and watched the empty road disappear into darkness. The same road she'd driven to Whispering Pines. The same road that had led her back to herself. By morning she'd already decided to go see them, not to say yes, not yet, but to see. When she arrived at the base perimeter, a guard recognized her instantly. "Ma'am, Colonel Stone, expecting you." The main compound looked transformed. New equipment, new personnel, new purpose. The unit she'd saved now carried a different kind of energy, sharper, lighter. Barnes spotted her first. "Ma'am," he broke into a grin, jogging over, "I didn't think you'd come." "I wasn't sure I would," she admitted. "You should see what you started," he said. "Coleman's running full-night ops with your method now. We call it the Hendress Protocol." She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerously official." "Official enough to make the Pentagon nervous," he said proudly. "They're rewriting the manual." Taylor laughed softly. "That's how revolutions start." "Maybe that's what we needed," Barnes said. "A small one." He led her to the range. It looked different now, more organized, more alive. Soldiers practiced in structured rotations, their movements fluid and confident. Major Coleman stood at the command table, headset around his neck. When he saw her, his expression softened into something almost like relief. "You came," he said. "I told you I'd check on your aim," she replied. He nodded toward the range. "We're running a live demo for the brass this afternoon. Think you'll stay to watch?" "I might," she said. "Depends on how many rules you're breaking." "Fewer than usual," he smirked. Then, after a pause, "How are you holding up?" She hesitated. "One day at a time." "That's all anyone can do." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the operators line up for drills. The air buzzed with the low hum of radios and the rhythm of precision. "You know," Coleman said quietly, "your father would have been proud. What you did out here, it'll outlast all of us." She didn't trust herself to speak, just nodded. When the demo began, Taylor moved to the observation tent. Generals, colonels, and advisors crowded behind glass monitors. Among them stood Agent Fleming, now in civilian dress, her expression unreadable. She caught Taylor's eye across the room, then gave a small nod, respect, not apology. The range went dark. Targets activated, relays clicked. The operators moved like ghosts, calm, synchronized, disciplined. Bang, ping, bang, ping. Every hit rang like a heartbeat. By the end, they'd cleared all 150 targets in record time. The brass erupted in applause. Taylor didn't cheer. She just watched, quiet, thoughtful. When it ended, Stone approached her, hands behind his back. "So, they did it without me," she said. He smiled faintly. "Because of you." "Then my job's done." Stone studied her. "That's not how I see it." She sighed. "I know what you're asking, sir, but I've got a store to run, a house to look after, a life that doesn't fit into the army anymore." "Maybe the army's what doesn't fit into your life," he said gently. "But what you carry, that's not something you can turn off." He handed her another envelope, smaller, simpler. "This one's personal." She opened it after he left. Inside was a note from Barnes and the team. "For the one who taught us to see without light. We'll keep your lessons where they matter most, between the heartbeat and the trigger." Below it, they'd all signed their names. She smiled. It wasn't a medal, but it meant more. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, she walked the range one last time. Empty now, silent except for the wind. Her reflection shimmered faintly in one of the steel targets, worn, scarred, strong. She whispered, "You'd have laughed at this, Dad." The wind answered softly, the way it used to on the porch. Back home, she cleaned the Barrett for the first time since the test. Every motion slow, deliberate, not ritual, not nostalgia. Respect. She placed it back in the case, closed the latch, and set it beneath her father's folded flag. Then she went outside, sat on the porch, and watched the sky turn from blue to gold to indigo. The world felt vast again, not empty, just waiting. A truck engine broke the quiet. Barnes pulled up, dust trailing behind him. He climbed out, holding something under his arm. "Major sent this," he said. It was a framed photograph. The team lined up on the range after the qualification night. In the middle, Taylor stood holding the Barrett, face calm, eyes steady. At the bottom, a brass plate read, "Sometimes the dark doesn't hide you, it teaches you how to see. CPT, T. Hendress." She stared at it, a faint smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. "Looks good," she said. "Thought you might like to keep it where it all started." "I will." He hesitated. "You ever think about coming back, even part-time?" Taylor looked toward the horizon. The wind picked up, carrying that faint metallic scent of rain. "Every day," she admitted, "but coming back isn't always the same as moving forward." Barnes nodded slowly. "Still, if we ever need you again." "You'll know where to find me," she finished. He smiled. "Yes, ma'am." When he left, she stayed there until the stars appeared. The kind of stars you only see in Wyoming, sharp, infinite, humbling. She thought about everything that had led here. The years of service, the heartbreak, the quiet sacrifices that no medal ever covers. She thought about her father's voice, that steady compass inside her that never stopped pointing true north. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel torn between who she was and who she'd become. Both belonged to the same woman. When the first raindrop landed on her hand, she whispered softly into the night, "You were right, Dad. We keep showing up." The rain came steady then, cool and clean, washing dust from the porch, the road, the grief. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, faint, patient, familiar. Taylor smiled. Because this time, it didn't sound like war. It sounded like peace finally answering back. Why do they always come back when you finally find quiet? Taylor asked herself that one gray morning 2 months later as she restocked shelves at Hendress Hardware. The air smelled of dust and motor oil, the same smell that used to calm her. But lately, even routine felt like camouflage, something meant to hide how restless she'd become. Cedar Bluff had returned to its rhythm. Farmers, ranchers, old veterans swapping stories. But to Taylor, the days had started to blur, the same sunrise, same wind, same coffee cooling too fast. Since her father's passing, she'd tried to stay busy, fixed things, helped at the diner, donated his uniforms to the local museum. She told herself she was fine, that peace was what she'd always wanted. But peace, she realized, had its own kind of loneliness. Every night she'd walk out to the porch, sit under the same stars and listen, not for coyotes or cars, but for something she couldn't name. Maybe it was purpose, maybe it was absence, maybe they were the same thing. That morning, the bell over the door chimed. "Be right with you," she called, turning with a polite smile, and froze. Major Nash Coleman stood in the doorway, still in uniform, his expression somewhere between duty and apology. "Morning, Miss Hendress." She set down the wrench in her hand. "You found me again." "Didn't have to look far," he said. "You're not exactly hiding." "Didn't think I needed to." He smiled faintly. "You don't, but I need your help." Those 6 words hit harder than any salute. Taylor leaned on the counter, arms crossed. "Let me guess, another qualification test." "Not this time," Coleman said quietly. "Something real." The room felt smaller suddenly. "Define real." He hesitated, then pulled an envelope from his jacket, thick, official, sealed in red. "Special Operations Advisory Request. Counterinsurgency Project. Training Mission, Off-Grid, Eastern Europe. We're forming a joint task unit, small team, specialized roles. They asked for you by name." "Who they?" "Colonel Stone," he said, "and a few people above him." Taylor's jaw clenched. I'm not active duty. They know. I haven't signed a clearance renewal in 3 years. They already reinstated it. She blinked. They can't just. They can, he said softly, and they did. She looked away, eyes tracing the rows of tools, drills, bolts, sawdust, things that made sense, things that didn't ask her to bleed for them. What's the mission? She asked finally. Coleman lowered his voice. Intelligence says a paramilitary group, been using long-range anti-materiel systems against NATO convoys, precision strikes. Whoever's pulling the trigger knows what they're doing too well. Stone believes it's one of ours, someone trained under your doctrine. Taylor's chest tightened. One of mine. We don't know yet, but if it's true, he didn't finish. She didn't need him to. If it was true, then somewhere out there, someone she'd trained had turned her method, her teaching, into something monstrous. Coleman continued. They want you to help identify the shooter's signature, maybe even help track them. Strictly advisory, no combat. Strictly advisory, she echoed, almost laughing. That's what they always say before things go sideways. He didn't deny it. I'm not the same person I was, she said after a long pause. My father's gone, my time in the field's done. Coleman's tone softened. Maybe, but you're still the only person who can read that kind of shot. You said it yourself once, the rifle doesn't lie. She stared at the envelope, the red seal catching the morning light like a wound. Finally, she said, give me 24 hours. He nodded. That's all I was hopping for. After he left, Taylor locked up the store early and drove out to the edge of town, to the river near her father's grave. The sky was overcast, the water dark and cold. She sat on the grass, the letter in her hands unopened. Someone's using what I taught Dad, she whispered, but not for good. The wind rustled through the trees. She almost imagined his voice in it. Then fix it, kid. If something's broken, you don't complain. You grab the wrench and make it right. She smiled through the ache. That's what you'd say, huh? The silence answered for him. She opened the envelope. Inside, a brief mission outline, coordinates, timeline. Nothing about location specifics, all redacted except for a single word, Kestrel. A code name. She exhaled. Of course it is. That night she couldn't sleep. The same question kept looping in her head. What if one of my students turned rogue? She remembered their faces, hundreds of them. Men and women from every background. Eager, driven, sometimes haunted. She taught them to survive, not to kill without conscience. But somewhere, maybe one hadn't learned the difference. By dawn, she'd made up her mind. When Coleman returned the next morning, she was already waiting outside, duffel bag packed, rifle case beside her. You're sure? He asked. No, she said honestly, but I'm going anyway. He smiled. That's the right kind of answer. The military transport lifted off from a private airstrip outside town, small, unmarked, quiet. Taylor sat by the window as the land she'd spent her life protecting shrank below her. Cedar Bluff disappeared beneath clouds. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The hum of the engines filled the silence like a heartbeat. Finally, Coleman said, Stone, waiting for us at Ramstein. We'll brief there, then move forward. Forward, she murmured. That's what we always call it, isn't it? Even when we don't know where it leads. He glanced at her. You okay? She shrugged. Ask me again when I see what I'm walking into. When they landed in Germany, rain streaked the tarmac. Gray skis, colder air. Taylor hadn't been on a base in years, but the smell, jet fuel, and damp asphalt was the same. Colonel Stone met them inside the hangar. He looked older now, or maybe just more burdened. Good to see you again, Captain, he said. Just Taylor, she corrected. Not this week, he said, handing her a file. Our target's been hitting convoys across 3 borders, always from extreme range over a mile. Same barrel rhythm, same thermal concealment pattern. No one else shoots like that. Taylor flipped through the photos, cratered trucks, precision entry points through armor plating, no collateral damage. Efficient. Surgical. She felt sick. That's your style, Stone said quietly. Your rhythm. Whoever this is, they learned from you, maybe directly, maybe through someone you trained. She swallowed hard. You want me to find them. And stop them if possible. Stop them how? Whichever way keeps others alive. Her grip tightened on the file. Later that night, she sat alone in the barracks, staring at the map spread across the table. Lines, grids, kill zones. Each shot pattern told a story, how the shooter breathed, how they aligned, how they thought. And that's when she saw it. A micro-adjustment on the third engagement. The kind of correction that came from a specific stance she'd only ever taught one person. Private First Class Elena Wexler. Her best student, her shadow. She remembered her vividly, 19, brilliant, quiet, eyes like frost. A natural talent, too good for her own age. Taylor had trained her personally for 6 months. Then Wexler had been reassigned overseas, classified ops. 2 years later, reports said she'd been KIA. Except maybe she hadn't been. Taylor closed the file slowly. Oh, Elena, what did they turn you into? Outside, thunder rumbled over Germany. She sat there for hours, unmoving. The mission had changed. This wasn't about stopping a rogue shooter anymore. It was about facing a ghost she'd created. And deep down, she knew this wouldn't be an advisory job for long. Because some lessons, once taught, never die. They just find their way back to the one who gave them life. When Coleman returned at midnight, she was still awake, eyes on the storm through the window. Couldn't sleep, he asked. She shook her head. It's not the storm keeping me up. What is? The realization, she said quietly, that the only person who can predict her next move is me. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Then we start at dawn. As he left, she whispered to herself, a mantra both prayer and curse. You train someone to see in the dark. You better be ready when they stop needing light. Outside, lightning cracked across the sky, sharp, white, merciless. And for the first time since her father's funeral, Taylor felt the old pulse return, not adrenaline, not fear, but purpose. The kind that hurts, the kind that heals, the kind that asks for one more step when you thought you were done walking. Tomorrow, she would hunt the student she'd once called her legacy. And in doing so, she'd learn whether what she'd taught was salvation or sin. How do you hunt someone who learned to disappear from you? That question haunted Taylor as their transport touched down in the Carpathians, a stretch of rugged wilderness that looked too ancient to belong to modern war. Fog rolled through the valleys like memory. Somewhere in that mist, her former student was waiting. The operation was small. Just Taylor, Major Coleman, and a 4-man reconnaissance team from NATO command. No insignias, no flags, no recognition. The kind of mission that didn't exist and would be denied if it failed. Their base was an abandoned ranger outpost hidden beneath pine trees. Maps, comms, long-range optics, all minimal. Quiet was their greatest weapon. Coleman unfolded a satellite printout on the table. Intel tracked a shot 2 nights ago, convoy ambushed at 1,500 meters, clean through the lead engine block. No casualties, but total disablement. Same ballistic signature. Whoever did it wanted them stopped, not dead. Taylor studied the trajectory lines. That's deliberate restraint. She's sending a message. Who? Taylor hesitated. Elena Wexler. Coleman frowned. The name's not in any current database. Are you sure? She was listed KIA 2 years ago, Taylor said. But that shooting pattern, she used a 6mm holdover correction at long range. I taught her that. Nobody else uses it, not even Delta. Why the correction? She trusted intuition over math, Taylor said quietly. I told her to only use it when everything else failed. If she's using it now, it means she's working without support. Then maybe we're not dealing with a traitor, Coleman said. Maybe we're dealing with someone abandoned. Taylor looked out the window, gray mist swallowing the mountains. Maybe those are the same thing. They left before dawn the next morning, trekking up through snow-mudded ridges. Drones circled above them like invisible hawks. The wind carried the smell of pine, diesel, and rain. By mid-morning, they reached the overlook where the last shot had originated. Taylor knelt, running her fingers over the frozen dirt. "See this," she said, pointing to a faint impression. "Left elbow, standard prone, but the angle's off. She's compensating for slope." Coleman crouched beside her. "You can tell all that from a patch of dirt." "I can tell more than that," she said, eyes scanning the slope. "She stayed low no more than 2 minutes, used a silencer, exfilled east." Coleman raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Taylor picked up a cartridge casing half buried under frost. .50 BMG, polished clean. "She's taunting me," Taylor whispered. "She knows I'd find this." That night back at the outpost, Taylor spread the casing on the table like a clue from an old life. The men talked logistics. She listened to the silence between their words. When Coleman joined her outside later, the air was bitter cold. "You okay?" "She's not killing anyone," Taylor said. "That's not Elena's pattern. She's targeting infrastructure, engines, tires, fuel lines. Crippling, not destroying." Coleman nodded slowly. "Why?" "She's trying to prove a point." "What point?" "That precision without conscience isn't strength. It's slavery." He studied her face. "You think she's sending that message to us?" "To me?" The words came out heavier than she meant them to. Coleman leaned on the railing beside her. "You taught her to see in the dark. Maybe now she's just showing you she can still do it." Taylor smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Then I need to remind her why we stopped shooting." At dawn, the next attack came. A NATO transport convoy 2 valleys south. Same method, precise, bloodless. The convoy stopped mid-route, unscathed but immobilized. The signature was unmistakable. Taylor and Coleman arrived hours later. Shell casings clean, ground disturbed, sniper's nest expertly concealed under brush, and on a rock carved into the ice with a knife, a single line. "You taught me how to see. Did you teach them how to feel?" Coleman read it aloud, voice low. "She's talking to you." Taylor's throat tightened. "No, she's confronting me." She stood there for a long time, wind whipping her hair, eyes locked on that message. This wasn't an ambush. It was a conversation, one being written in ballistics and silence. That night she asked for isolation time. Coleman didn't argue. She sat in the outpost's upper room, staring at the casing again, thinking about Elena, the girl who used to stay late after drills, the one who'd asked questions no one else dared ask. "Ma'am, why do we need to see in the dark if we could just turn on the light?" "Because the light makes you visible, Vexler. The dark keeps you alive." But now she wondered, had she taught survival or detachment? The next morning, Taylor made a decision she didn't tell command. "Coleman," she said, "we're not going to find her by chasing her." "Then how?" "By letting her find me." He looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You're proposing baiting an elite sniper trained under your own system." "That's exactly what I'm proposing." He exhaled through his nose. "You think she won't take the shot?" "She'll take it," Taylor said, "but not to kill." He hesitated. "You trust her that much?" "I trust who she used to be," Taylor said softly. "That's enough." They set up on a ridge 2 miles east, open terrain, minimal cover. Taylor laid her Barrett across the rock, sighted not at a target but into the fog. The others withdrew to a perimeter position. Coleman stayed beside her. Hours passed, the air grew still, not a bird, not a sound. Then a whisper. A soft metallic click across the valley. barely audible but distinct to anyone who'd spent their life listening for it. "She's here," Taylor whispered. Coleman reached for the radio. She stopped him. "No comms. If she hears interference, she'll vanish." They waited. Then a shimmer of movement through mist, a faint glint like sunlight on glass. Taylor didn't aim, she just watched. A single round hit the rock 3 inches from her scope, precise enough to warn, deliberate enough to miss. Coleman tensed. That was a warning. Taylor nodded. "I told you." She stood slowly, stepped out into the open, hands empty. "Elena," she called, voice echoing off stone. "It's me." Silence. "You're better than this," she shouted. "Whatever they did to you, whatever you think I did, this isn't how it ends." Still nothing. Then a voice, carried faintly through the wind. "You left us." Taylor froze. The voice was older, harsher, but unmistakable. "Elena," she said softly, "you were reported KIA. I didn't know." "I wasn't dead," the voice replied. "I was invisible like you taught me." Taylor's heart hammered. "Who did this to you?" A pause, then, "The same people who sent you here." Coleman scanned the ridges with his scope. "No visual," he whispered. "Don't," Taylor said sharply. "She'll see the glass." She took a step forward. "I trained you to survive, not to serve ghosts. You can walk away." Another silence, then a faint, bitter laugh. "Walk away to what? They used me, Captain. My hands built their doctrine, my eyes burned their secrets, and when I started asking why, they buried me." Taylor's throat tightened. "Then let me fix this." "You can't fix what you created," Elena said, "but you can end it." Something shifted in the air, a finality Taylor could feel before she understood it. "Elena," she said quickly, "don't you do this." A flash. The bullet hit the rock 3 feet away, ricocheted harmlessly into dirt, but the intent was clear. It wasn't aimed to kill, it was farewell. By the time Coleman's spotter found the nest, it was empty. She was gone again. Back at the outpost, Taylor stood over the map, silent, still shaking. "She wanted you to find her," Coleman said, "so you'd understand something." "I do," Taylor whispered. "What?" "That she wasn't running from us." She looked up. "She was running from what we've become." Coleman's jaw tightened. "We can still stop her." "No," Taylor said quietly. "She's already stopped herself." He didn't understand at first. Then he saw the tremor in her hands, the quiet realization that this mission wasn't victory or defeat. It was a reckoning. Later that night, as the wind howled through the mountains, Taylor sat alone with the last casing she'd found. She turned it in her fingers, the metal catching lamplight like memory. It wasn't about killing. It never had been. It was about the price of teaching people to walk through darkness, without showing them where the light should lead. Coleman approached quietly, setting down 2 mugs of coffee. "What happens now?" Taylor looked out at the storm. "We go home." "You think she'll disappear again?" "She already has." He studied her face. "You did what you came here to do, Taylor. You faced her." "No," she said softly. "I faced myself." The wind rattled the windows, then quieted. She took one last sip of coffee and set the casing on the table. "She wanted me to remember something," Taylor said. "That the weapon isn't the danger. The person holding it is." Coleman nodded slowly. "That's what you told us back in Wyoming." "Yeah," she said, half smiling. "Funny how the truth finds its way back." Outside, dawn began to bleed through the fog. The world felt cold again, but clean. Taylor stood, grabbed her jacket, and slung the Barrett case over her shoulder. "You leaving already?" Coleman asked. "I've been gone long enough," she said. And as she walked into the pale morning light, her silhouette faded into the mist, one soldier carrying her ghosts quietly, the way warriors always do. Because sometimes, the hardest battles aren't fought against enemies. They're fought against echoes. Why do the quietest endings echo the longest? 2 weeks after the Carpathian mission, Taylor stepped off the transport back in Wyoming. The mountains hadn't changed. The air still carried the same dry chill, the same smell of dust and pine. But something inside her had shifted, something she couldn't quite name. No brass bands, no reports, no medals. Just a single folder handed to her by a logistics officer before she left Germany. Mission concluded. Advisory assignment closed. Personnel debrief classified. That was it. 12 words to summarize everything she'd lived through. Cedar Bluff looked smaller than she remembered. The hardware store's sign creaked in the wind like it was still waiting for her. She parked out front, sat in the truck for a long time before going inside. Dust had settled on the counter. A few unpaid invoices, a half-empty coffee mug, a forgotten wrench. Life paused in mid-breath. She turned the closed sign to open, though she knew no one was coming. After a while, Sheriff Walsh wandered in, hat tilted low. "Well, I'll be damned," he said softly. "Thought maybe you'd gone for good this time." "Almost did," she said. He studied her for a moment. "You look tired." "I am. You need anything?" She smiled faintly. "Just a quiet morning." He nodded, left her to it. Taylor walked through the aisles, touching familiar things, toolboxes, gloves, the same cracked linoleum her father used to curse at. She stopped by his old stool, the one still dented where his boots used to rest. The ache hit harder than she expected. She sat down, running her fingers over the worn wood, and let herself remember. The porch talks. The nights when the world felt too big. The mornings when he'd simply nod at her coffee and say, "Keep showing up." That phrase used to sound simple. Now it felt like the hardest thing in the world. As the day stretched on, she cleaned the store, fixed what was broken, straightened shelves, the kind of small, steady work that reminded her what normal felt like. But when the sun began to set, she drove out to the river again, to the oak tree that marked her parents' graves. The grass had grown tall around the headstones. She sat between them, the wind rustling softly through the leaves. "I did what you'd have done, Dad," she whispered. "Went back when I didn't want to, faced something I didn't want to face, but it wasn't about the mission." She paused. "It was about remembering who I was and who I'm not anymore." A bird landed on a nearby branch, silent but curious. Taylor smiled faintly. "You'd say that means something, wouldn't you?" The wind answered the way it always did, wordless, patient, knowing. She stayed there until dusk swallowed the valley. Then she stood, brushed dirt from her jeans, and looked at the sky. The same stars she'd taught others to aim beneath. And she thought of Elena Wexler, the student who became a ghost, the mirror she never wanted to face. Some nights she'd see flashes of that ridge, fog, silence, the echo of that final shot that wasn't meant to kill. And she'd hear the question carved into the rock all over again. "You taught me how to see. Did you teach them how to feel?" It haunted her, not because it accused her, but because it was true. She'd trained soldiers to survive. She trained them to outthink fear, to read wind, to count heartbeats between death and decision. But she'd never known how to teach the part that mattered most, how to carry the weight after. Maybe because she hadn't known how herself. Now she did. That night she sat on her porch again. The Barrett case leaned quietly against the wall, unopened since she'd come home. The folded flag sat above it, a perfect triangle of silence. She poured a cup of coffee, black and simple, and watched the horizon fade from orange to indigo. The world was finally still. When headlights appeared in the distance, she didn't flinch. A jeep rolled up the dirt road. Barnes stepped out, wearing civilian clothes this time, jeans, jacket, fatigue still written on his face. "Hope I'm not intruding," he said. "Not at all," she said. "Coffee's still hot." He joined her on the porch. For a while they didn't speak, just sat there, two soldiers who didn't need words to fill the silence. After a while he said, "I heard what happened out there. You found her, didn't you?" Taylor nodded slowly. "In a way." "Did she make it out?" "She's alive," Taylor said, "but she's gone, her choice." Barnes studied her. "And you're okay with that?" Taylor took a long sip of coffee before answering. "I don't know if okay is the right word, but I understand it. Sometimes surviving means disappearing." He nodded, eyes distant. "Major's retiring," said the program being expanded. "They're calling it Project Kestrel now." Taylor smirked faintly. "Fitting name." He said it's because kestrels see ultraviolet light. They see what no one else can. She looked out at the stars. "Maybe that's the lesson then, seeing differently." Barnes leaned forward. "You should come see the new range sometime. There's a room named after you." She laughed softly. "Don't tell me that, makes me sound dead." "You're not," he said quietly. "You're just part of the story now." Taylor turned to him, something gentle but firm in her voice. "We're all part of someone's story, Barnes. Just make sure yours means something." He nodded, "Always." When he left, she stayed there, just the hum of the wind and the ticking of the porch light. And in that quiet she thought about all the lives that had crossed hers. Her father, Coleman, Stone, Elena, the men she trained, the ghosts she carried. They were all chapters of the same book, one she hadn't realized she'd been writing until now. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had taught, built, steadied, destroyed, healed. They weren't shaking anymore. The next morning, the first light touched the porch. The world smelled like rain and clean wood. She took the Barrett case, opened it for the first time in weeks. The metal gleamed under the rising sun. She ran her hand along the barrel, then set it gently on the bench beside her. There was no ceremony, no prayer, just stillness. Then, with quiet precision, she disassembled the rifle piece by piece, barrel, receiver, optics, stock, until it lay open like the memory it had become. She cleaned each part, wrapped it in cloth, and placed it into a wooden crate. On the lid, she wrote in simple black marker, "For training, for learning, never for revenge." She sealed it, carried it to her truck, and drove it down to the sheriff's office. Walsh raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Donation," she said, "for the Academy range." "You sure you want to part with it?" She smiled. "It's not parting, it's passing on." He nodded slowly, respecting the weight behind the words. When she drove home, the sky was bright, impossibly blue, stretching forever. She parked by the house, sat on the porch again, and let herself breathe. No missions, no orders, no ghosts. Just the sound of wind in the grass, and the echo of her father's voice somewhere deep inside. "Keep showing up." She smiled faintly. "I will." And as the day unfolded, quiet, unhurried, ordinary, Taylor Hendress finally understood something she'd spent a lifetime missing. It was never about the shot, the target, or the mission. It was about what came after, what you chose to hold, and what you chose to let go. The world would keep fighting its wars. People would keep breaking and rebuilding, but she didn't need to carry all of it anymore. Somewhere far away, another team would be training. Someone else would be learning to see without light. And maybe if she'd done her job right, they'd remember to feel too. The sun slipped lower, the light turning gold. Taylor closed her eyes, letting warmth replace the cold places inside her. Sometimes, she thought, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.